Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the first of a series of bite-sized videos around realist evaluation, also known as how and why evaluation, explanatory evaluation. Just to introduce ourselves, my name's Dr. Kev Harris, and I'm a reader in sports management at Hibah University, and I work quite closely with a number of places and spaces across the country in terms of building capacity in this type of approach to evaluation, working quite closely with Sport England as well on a number of projects. And alongside me is
Louis Ryan. So I'm an evaluation consultant working closely with Kev Harris and Hibah University.
So this is the first of, as I said, a series of bite-sized videos that hopefully won't be any longer than 10 minutes, where myself and Louis will kind of be taking some turn taking around introducing you to the specific phases of doing what we call a realist evaluation, which essentially is looking at, in the most simplistic form, how and why something works, how and why do the interventions that we're producing work, how and why the programs work, how and why are we influencing the system, what is it about the resources that we're providing within specific spaces or within specific environments leading to specific changes. And this is really important if you're involved in physical activity based type of provision and programs, or system change, or whole of systems based work, because quite often the work that you are doing will be very orientated around complexity and quite context specific. So this is the first session. In terms of what we're going to cover today is a very brief introduction to what a realist evaluation is, very straightforward. And also we're going to talk a little bit around the first phase of a realist evaluation, or explanatory evaluation, which is developing assumptions and beliefs, also known as program theories. So just on to the first point, in terms of to try to kind of bring this to life a little bit, we would argue that in all shapes of form, in daily life, we tend to have conversations every day that kind of position us as realists, and by being a realist, we're starting to sort of like, occupy this position that we need to dig a little bit deeper. So for example, here are some examples here. So I don't know, Louis, has anyone ever said to you, I'm not sure about that person, or I can't quite put my finger on it in terms of what that person's about?
Yeah, there's definitely examples talking about how important, say, a sports coach is to somebody. They say how great they are, and when you ask a bit more about, well, what is it about them? Quite often it's a case of, well, I can't quite put my finger on it, or you know what, actually, for us as evaluators, there's something going on beneath the surface here, and we can look a bit deeper and find out some more.
Yeah, so for example, someone might say to you, what did you make of that? Or, I can't put my finger on it, or we need to dig a little bit deeper here to understand what's going on. Those are usually the types of questions that lend themselves to the realist type of endeavor, to be able to start to explore a little bit more around what we would call the explanation, or causation behind what's going on within the work that we're doing. So in terms of thinking about what constitutes a realist evaluation, and some of the things that we are doing quite closely within specific settings are we need to kind of really think about some of the key principles of what doing a realist evaluation is involved. So in some of the previous sessions that we've done on this, as you'll see on the slides, we've done some interaction. So if you're viewing this presentation, and you're thinking about how you can start to bring this to life a little bit more, it might be good to reflect, if you've been doing some reading on it, around, what do you currently know, what are your perceptions of it, what might be some of the limitations of it, because one of the things that we do recognise is that some of the terminology surrounding a realist approach, for example, I don't know what your views are, Louis, can be constraining at times.
Definitely, I agree. And I think it's an opportunity now for yourselves listening and watching to write down any realist buzzwords that might come up already for something, whether it's to go away and read more to see if by the end of these videos you've got an understanding of what they do mean, and if there's any other terminology that we could potentially use instead.
And it might be that some of this doesn't mean much to you at the moment, because this might be the first time that you're actually viewing something like this around realist methodology or explanatory accounts, for example. So maybe come back to this once you start to read a little bit more, and you will definitely come across some of those potential buzzwords which might be constraining whilst also enabling as well. So one of the things that we kind of talk about within realist methodology is realist evaluation is about the iceberg. So really straightforward, won't go through this too much. Is essentially the point is we're trying to go beneath the surface. We're trying to understand what is it that's causing what we're seeing in our own eyes on the surface. For example, increases in physical activity, for example, people being more socially connected, people going out and cycling their bikes through these interventions that are running, for example. We're seeing all of these things, we're seeing all these kind of like outcomes and outputs, but what we see on the surface isn't necessarily a true reflection or an explanation as to why and how these types of things are kind of manifesting themselves. So that's where the iceberg works for some people, it doesn't work for others, is a nice analogy to start thinking about, okay, well, what's going on what's going on beneath the surface tells a much bigger picture and explains what we see actually in reality. So that's a really important kind of like philosophical point to make when we're looking at this type of explanatory thinking. So Louis, did you want to talk about the principles of a realist explanatory evaluation?
Yeah, so for a realist evaluation, we'd look at 3 different phases to go through and complete this essentially. So the first phase would be developing these program theories. And now this would be around the assumptions and beliefs, the underlying theories of how a program might work. And this is a phase that really allows you to think and reflect upon the program, to not just understand how it might work, but to draw this out so that we can understand if we introduce a social mobility program into an area, then we will have positive outcomes because of the program and the participants responding to that program.
And sometimes we refer to these, sometimes we move away from program theories. We talk sometimes, or more commonly now, within the idea of developing explanatory accounts or developing explanatory statements, which are basically just hypotheses around this is what we think is going to happen and this is why we think it's going to happen, which is kind of like the starting point, the first phase of an explanatory or realist type of evaluation.
Absolutely. And then the idea of then testing these assumptions and these explanatory accounts to go ahead using different methods that are appropriate. Realist evaluation isn't wedded to a quantitative approach or a qualitative approach, more about working what's realistic for the evaluation. So using this as an opportunity to go out and speak to participants, speak to stakeholders to understand if the assumptions and these explanatory accounts are true, or whether they need refining, which leads us on to phase 3, which gives us an opportunity to potentially change or refine these theories, these explanatory accounts for how the program is seen to be working.
So the whole idea then in terms of learning is obviously present across all phases of this type of evaluation, but it's particularly prominent towards the end, where I wouldn't say towards the end, but within the 3rd phase, where this whole idea of refinement is based on this idea of, okay, what can we learn around these assumptions and beliefs that we've tested? We've used a series of different methods to do that. You know, Louis just mentioned it could be some interviews with participants, stakeholders. It could be surveys, questionnaires. It could be stories of change. As I say, it's very neutral in terms of the types of approaches that the evaluation approach will favour. And it's also very participatory as well, because you can start to test these assumptions and beliefs in nice innovative ways that are quite, you know, inclusive, where practitioners can be involved in mobilising what we call how and why conversations as well. But the whole idea is that by the time that you've done that testing and you've started to, you know, mobilise those methods, there will be a lot of learning that needs to be unpacked and that comes out of it. So the whole idea is that those assumptions and beliefs that you had at the very beginning, which were basically premised around how and why you see the project working, or how and why you see things working, which a lot of the time can be very inclusive as well, will lead to maybe new changes and new refinements to how the ways of working or the specific focus of the evaluation changes, as in the project moving forward. So those are the key principles of an explanatory realist evaluation. And here are just some examples of how you would usually start within phase one. Phase one, which is what the key focuses of this session, is around developing assumptions and beliefs, and that's the starting point of all these types of approaches. So by theory, we're talking about assumptions, views, values, insights. It could be strategies, perspectives that people have around what this whole project or program intervention or system change piece is essentially focusing on. And you know, in particular, we start to think about some explanatory questions in relation to that. For example, if we do this, then this will happen because, and start to build some questions on from that. So in terms of sense making, these are some good questions that we usually start to occupy with our stakeholders that we work with, or if you're interested in doing this type of evaluation, the way in which to go about it. And there's lots of good questions there to start thinking about that will open up that explanatory lens, such as, you know, who are these projects for? Who are the programs for? What types of people? Because the for whom piece is really important here. The context element, the circumstances in which this whole program or you know, whole of systems approaches work that you might be doing is very much dependent on the circumstances that are in existence. What are the outcomes? What needs to be in place for this to work? And the how and whys really start to build those kind of explanatory accounts and statements. And here's some others as well that you could maybe start to think about in terms of patterns of change, unanticipated changes, influential contexts or circumstances, to really start to, you know, warm you up and kind of get you thinking about some of those explanatory questions that might lead to what we call the if then because statement. So Louis, do you want to just finish off by talking about some examples of if then because?
Yeah, so we just wanted to give a slight more context in terms of developing some if then because statements. So to begin with, we like to start with the context, which is vital when looking at these different scenarios and programs. So for example, here we've got disadvantaged young people who have a good relationship with their coach. So if we then look at the if then because, so if we introduce a coaching course for disadvantaged young people who attend sports sessions, then some participants will go on to coach for their local sports club. Really important is that because that reason, we're looking past the outcome and understanding this is because they've built up that trust with their peers and fellow coaches through becoming qualified. Now, agree with this, disagree with this. This is just a starting point for the evaluation. This is an assumption of how the program is working, our explanatory account, and this is what we would then go on and test so that we can change this. For example, it might be that the context, we're not actually working with these disadvantaged young people, or it's an opportunity to confirm this as well. And the reasons, we might get the same outcome, that participants go on to coach for their local sports club, but it might be that the because is different, and it's not because they've built up trust. It might be different reasons that we weren't aware of before, and this testing method has allowed us to do that.
And then, you know, finally, the last point to say is that what then happens beyond here, then you start to think about, okay, well, this is a hunch, this is an assumption and belief that we have about what we're trying to do. The next step is to think about, okay, well, what methods then might we use and utilize to go out and start to put that theory or put that assumption and belief or that if then because statement to the test, which is the next step, and what we will focus in the following video essentially. So thank you for your time, thank you for listening, and we'll hopefully see you for the next videos.